Hey gang, it's Pete from sportconsumer.com, and today we're going to talk about how to buy a pop-up tent and why you should do it. That's what this is right here. You've probably seen this already, but it's just so much fun to do. So I'm going to open it up right in front of you, right? And you know it takes less than 1.5 seconds, right? If you don't, prepare to be amazed. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2. Well, that one kind of landed upside down, but anyway, that was less than 2 seconds. All right, let's talk about why you want one of these and how to get one. All right, guys, so here we are in my little two-person pop-up tent. The first thing you want to do when you're looking for one of these is to determine what is your purpose. Why do you need one of these? Do you want it for backpacking? Just on a trail, or maybe you're canoeing? That's what I like to do. Wilderness canoe trip, that's what I need this guy for. But a lot of people want to go with a family of 6, 7 people to a campground. If you want to do that, you can have a couple of these, but it's probably a better idea to get a larger one. Which brings me to the next point, which is, do you want a full pop-up tent like this one was, where you just chuck it up into the air and it opens? Or do you want one that is a larger tent and it's sort of a hybrid between instant pop-up and one that requires a tiny bit of effort, when you just kind of grab the top of it and pull it up, and when you pull it up it just kind of opens up on its own at that point. So there's a little bit of effort involved, but it can accommodate larger tents. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. What's the purpose? And that will lead you to the exact type of tent. I only own a small two-person tent like this. I don't have one of the bigger ones, although I really do want to buy one. So that might happen soon, within the next month or so. All right, so the next thing to consider is, what is the season that you're going to be using the tent? Is it wintertime in the mountains, or is it summertime around a lake camping? Big difference in tents. So in the wintertime, cold weather, you'll want a mountaineering tent. And what that is a much stronger tent, has more structural rods, and it doesn't have as much mesh. Because with a mesh, you've just got a lot of wind blowing. Even if you have a fly, still doesn't stop wind from getting in under the fly and blowing through your tent. And of course, if it's winter, that can include snow as well. So you're going to want one that's fairly tight, airtight, and not really meshy. All right. On the other hand, you want the exact opposite. If you're camping in the summertime, you want as much ventilation as you can, and that will be a tent with a lot of mesh. This particular tent actually has quite a bit of mesh on the inside. Now you can't see it because it has a rain fly built in. And so I'm looking at it in here. You've got some mesh. It doesn't really matter. It's just meshy. All right, so you got a lot of ventilation. This is definitely not a mountaineering tent. The next item you absolutely want to consider is weight. Now the problem with weight is that while we all know we want the lightest tent possible, the reality is that in this style of tent, the kind that you just chuck up in the air and opens up, there's not a lot of variety available. So for example, if you want a two-person tent like this one, it's not like you can go anywhere to even a local retailer or online and say, well, I would like a two-person pop-up tent, but I think that 8 pounds is too heavy. I want this one that is rated at 6 pounds, or whatever. You're not going to have that option. Pretty much every tent that I've seen that is a two-person pop-up like this is kind of around the same weight, and it's not going to make any difference to you. A few ounces here and there, not really. So weight is a consideration. However, you're probably not going to have that much of an option to really become selective in the exact weight that you would like to purchase. All right, so the next thing you want to consider is the issue of roominess. How roomy is it? Do you feel like you want to sit up and read a book, or is it just enough to sleep, and then when you get up you kind of hit the edges of it? All right, these are more considerations. Dual entry is a really neat consideration. If you have the option to look at a tent with dual entry as a pop-up tent, I would consider that, because then you don't have somebody crawling over you to get to the other side of the tent to get out, they can get out on their own side. So in a 2-person tent, I don't know how important that is, but once you get 3 people and for sure 4 people, you might want to consider a tent with dual entry. Also in the area of roominess, you might want to consider a tent with a vestibule. Now this one does not have one. This one is about as portable as they come, so that doesn't have any upgrades. But a vestibule would be where the rain fly kind of comes out a couple of feet, and you can put your shoes outside and maybe some other gear that's not too sensitive to the elements, and you don't have to bring it inside and get, you know, gravel and mud all over everything inside. I have a tent that unfortunately is not a pop-up tent, but it has 2 vestibules and dual entry. So everybody in the tent, usually there's only 2 of us in the tent, you can have your own entrance as well as a place for you to put your own shoes on either side of the tent, so you're not bugging the other person in the tent or getting dirt in the tent. Pockets. Pockets are important. If you have the option, I would go for a tent with more pockets. This particular one has 1 little pocket on one side, just for whatever little things like a cell phone or you know, a flashlight, just kind of over your head. They're all different in every tent, but if you have the option, I'd kind of go for it. I like pockets, but it's not a deal breaker for me. And last of all, in the area of roominess, is the issue of shape. I kind of touched on it a bit earlier, but see, this particular tent is very voluminous. All right, it's kind of like a bubble. Most instant pop-up tents are, but there are some options that will be less roomy. They're just as functional to sleep in, but you kind of don't want to spend any time in it. In fact, you might not even be able to. You can't even really sit up. This one, you can at least sit up in it, and you know, you don't really feel terribly claustrophobic in it. All right, so I can tell you that about this style, but you know, other styles may not be so. They might be more like this shaped instead of that, which this one is. All right, now to the next issue, and that is the issue of watertightness, waterproofness. Oh, I have a lot to say about this. Most tents are waterproof to a degree, all right, because they're made out of nylon, and most nylon is kind of waterproof, especially if it's treated for tents. The thing is, I remember growing up as a kid that my dad always, just like on me about this, constantly when we're in a tent. He's like, don't touch the side, don't touch the tent, don't touch the edge of the tent, don't touch, don't put your fingers on there, don't touch. Well, you know, I make him sound mean. He was a good guy, but really, it got tiresome to listen to. I'm like, I know, Dad, I know, don't touch the edge of the tent. Well, you know why he said that? He said that because any tent, no matter how waterproof it is, if you touch the inside of it, a lot of you probably already know this, but if you touch the inside of it, you will you'll enable the water to come in a little bit easier, right? That's the way it works. Now, if you have a tent or a rain fly like this, that will help negate that issue a little bit. But anywhere that the water is touching on the outside, if you touch your finger on it, especially if you rub it around a little bit like a kid sometimes likes to do, it's going to start dripping in the tent or leaking down the edge inside the tent. So that's something to consider. I don't care how much money you spend on a tent. I'm going to give you the same advice. Don't touch the edge of the tent. If you're getting a pop-up tent, here's the key. Here's the issue. The rain fly, you can kind of see it here on the outside, it does not cover the entire tent. It doesn't go right down to the edge and out here like many other tents, non-pop-up style, do. So this is kind of a trade-off, convenience for, you know, functionality. This style, and you'll see a lot that are this style if you go anywhere, especially on Amazon, you'll see quite a number of them in this particular style. This style of a tent will never have a fly that covers the entire tent. I shouldn't say never. Maybe they will in the future, but they don't right now. So it won't cover everything. So I would suggest that if you bring this type of tent with you on a wilderness trip somewhere, that you that it would be not something you want to stay in for multiple days of rain, unless you bring something like a tarp that you string between the trees or something to try to minimize the amount of rainfall on this, because eventually this will leak where the water is not hitting the fly, where it's blowing against the side of it. Well, yeah, eventually something's going to happen, probably sooner rather than later. So that's one thing. The one thing that I'm just not super thrilled about this tent is that the rain fly, it's built in, which is great, except that it doesn't cover the whole tent. It covers the top. And what it's doing is it's not actually giving me 2 layers of protection, the fly and the tent. No, because right under the fly is the mesh that I spoke about earlier. So without the fly, there's 0 protection from rain. So it's not like I'm getting 2 layers of protection. I'm still only getting 1 layer of protection. It is the fly. All right, so this is so in other words, it's like a regular tent with no fly. That's really what this is, which is water resistant, and it's okay for a while, but eventually it's gonna give way. So anyway, just another consideration when you're thinking about the convenience of a wonderful pop-up tent like this one. Okay, we've come to the end of our video. There's one last thing I want to say, is that when you take this tent down and get it ready to pack away, there's 2 things to consider. Number 1, if you don't do it enough, or if you don't do it often enough, you might have a problem doing this. All right, it took me a while to figure out how to do this consistently and easily, regularly. It wasn't that easy. The instructions that came with it, they're not that good, to be honest, on how to break down this tent. Okay, so that can be an issue. And then the last thing is that it's not a tent that you can roll up and stick in your backpack. In fact, because of the way that it has to sit when you've disassembled it, it's like a big disc, and it has its own straps to make it a backpack. So it itself is a backpack. So it's a bit of an unusual thing. I mean, it's certainly not a heavy backpack. It's not a burden to carry, but there it is on your back. It's about the size of like Captain America's shield, and you feel like you can kind of whip it out like that. Yeah, Captain America. It's going through my mind when I'm carrying this tent. That's weird.